Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by survivingbreastcancer.org. I am Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of survivingbreastcancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations. I am so excited you are here today. We have so much great content coming your way, and this is actually coming out in a two-part series. So today we're going to talk about genetics. Let me give you the rundown. Dr. Mártir-Negrón is a medical geneticist at Miami Cancer Institute, a world-class cancer center, part of Baptist Health, South Florida. Dr. Mártir-Negrón is trained in internal medicine, genetic diagnosis, and the treatment of patients with hereditary disorders. Dr. Mártir-Negrón is board certified in medical genetics and internal medicine. Her clinical interests include genetic cancer risk assessment, breast cancer, colon cancer, and ovarian cancer. We are also joined today with a panel of women, moms, and daughters who have all been affected by either breast cancer or a germline genetic mutation, which increases one's risk for developing cancer. I am pleased to have Abigail Johnston moderate today's discussion as part of our NBC webinar series we host every other Sunday. She is joined with her mom, Beverly Schroeder. We also have a longtime and dear friend of mine, Trish Chambers-Ballas, who is a 3-time breast cancer survivor, with her daughter, Maddie Ballas. I am also pleased to have Stephanie McLeod Estevez on the panel. After losing her mom to metastatic breast cancer, Stephanie decided not to rush into getting genetic testing. She focused on grieving the loss of her mother and starting her own family. It wasn't until after she became a mom and was diagnosed with breast cancer that she discovered that she carries the BRCA2 mutation. With a stellar panel of personal experiences and medical expertise, we will be sharing this content in 2 parts. In case you missed part 1, I'm going to link to that in the show notes below. Part 1 covered the technical, who's on your genetics team, the difference between a genetics counselor and a geneticist, plus all of the different types of genes you could be tested for. In today's episode, we're going to focus on the emotional side of a breast cancer diagnosis and genetic testing.
There is no reason to test somebody younger than 25. And I say that because I have the experience of seeing an 18-year-old running out of my office because she learned this.
And it's just going to be a generational thing. So I'm going to treat it like it's just part of us. When she tested, I knew in my science mind, she was going to come up positive. In my mother mind, I was hoping and praying that she wasn't.
5 years earlier, if somebody would have contacted me and said, you need to get tested, I would have done it. Maybe she would have not become metastatic.
Welcome to the conversation.
What I want to shift to just a little bit is to talk about the emotional side of things. And so, Stephanie, I want to come back to you, especially since you have that mental health background, and talk about the, for you personally, when you found out that you had a genetic mutation, especially after having lost your mom. Can you talk a little bit about that, the experience of finding out and how you dealt with that?
Sure. I mean, I found out in the course of already confronting stage 3A triple negative breast cancer. So at that point I was like, so moving back a little bit, my mom, she had breast cancer twice. The first time it was treated and in theory went away. And then it recurred about 6 or 7 years after that. And that was metastatic. And the one thing that she never did was the bilateral mastectomy. So in the back of my mind, in that, so I was 19 the first time she was diagnosed and 40 when I was diagnosed. That was always on my plan. And so then I got diagnosed with cancer and I was like, okay, well that I really wanted, but it was interesting because I had a consultation with Dana-Farber. So I had been diagnosed. I had my first round of adriamycin, Cytoxan. I was going down to Dana-Farber and make sure that I was checking all the boxes because there was unusual aspects of the breast cancer itself. And I obviously wanted to live, as we all do, and knew that, with her dying, I wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing. So the blood had been drawn, but I didn't have results yet. And I found it interesting to hear from them at that time. And this is 2014. They're like, well, you really don't have to have a bilateral mastectomy unless you have a mutation, and then absolutely do that and have the oophorectomy, which I eventually did that when I got my new boobs. I'm like, if I'm going to lose the last part of my femininity, which is my ovaries, ovaries and fallopian tubes, right? I'm like, I'm going to have new boobs on. So that was kind of where I was at. It was like I was already in the throes of treatment. So it's not that at that point, I think I had dealt with the emotional, I had really dealt with the emotional piece because what I kind of always wondered had come true. And I was just sort of moving forward. I already had 2 children. I knew I wasn't going to be able to have any more because I was going through cancer and having all these things done to me. So my kids were 5 and 7 when I was diagnosed, and maybe I was done with treatment. But my oldest, maybe like a year later, looked and he's like, Mom, one day I'll probably have cancer. And it was like this just casual comment. Like, what, I might have peanut butter and jelly for lunch, Mom, and it was really intense. But at the same time, I was like, okay, he's handling things pretty well. The children are very resilient. And I hope that isn't the case for him. I think it was more emotional, quite honestly, once I figured out my mom was one of 5, my Uncle Joe, who looks like, my grandfather's brother, he had breast cancer in his 70s. He ended up getting tested positive, and that helped him catch he had prostate cancer. And then, part of the treatment for that is, for whatever reason, they give him estrogen. So then he ended up with breast cancer too. But I think I actually was more emotional when I learned that he was positive than I was for myself. And so I don't know. I think it hits you in different ways at different times. And that's just kind of life, I guess.
Trisha, when it comes to you, as far as, the emotions of when you found out that you carry the mutations, especially as a mom with a daughter, how did that impact you?
Well, I had to think, I told this to Laura last night when I was making notes. I don't think about my own cases as much as I do other people that I'm helping right now. And it made me go into the whole history and really thinking about it. And I became emotional then instead of way back then. I think the pace that I was running at, I never allowed myself to really feel anything because we were either, and Maddie can attest to this, we were either building a house or moving, or, I was working full time, traveling all over the place, and things were crazy. But when I found out, I always pushed her to, just like she said, she would come home from college and I would say, do you want to test? Do you want to test? I'm not ready, Mom. As soon as she'd say, I'm not ready, I'm like, okay, you got time, but I'm going to stay on you because, we know that knowledge is power. At the same time, it's also a heavy burden to know that you carry the gene. And so I didn't want her to, she said to me, why don't I get tested and you get the results, Mom, but I'm not going to get the results. And I was like, okay, we can't do that, Maddie. We can't, as much as that makes sense for her to not have that burden, the emotional burden, if she was positive, I would have to take her down the track of seeing people. And so I remember thinking back when my mom passed away. I was 33 when she passed away, but she had breast and then she had ovarian cancer for the last 5 years. And so I just remember thinking, was it going to happen to me? And then when Maddie was born, and especially having a girl, not that males, as you talked about, Stephanie, don't get breast cancer. It was just like, oh, here I go, and it's just going to be a generational thing. So I'm going to treat it like it's just part of us. When she tested, I knew in my science mind, she was going to come up positive. In my mother mind, I was hoping and praying that she wasn't. I don't feel guilty. I just want to protect her, and make sure she gets the best of the best healthcare.
But you are, because you gave her this knowledge that you didn't have in time. And I'm sorry, but I want to make 2 points. Point one is you have a mutation in the BRCA gene. We all have the BRCA genes. These are tumor suppressor genes. They're working in your favor. So it's not bad. BRCA1 and BRCA2, they're not bad genes. To the contrary, they're very good. But when they're not working well, then the protection that they give is not there and cancer may happen. So the correct way to say is I have a mutation in the gene, because all these genes, for example, Abigail has the BRCA1 and BRCA2, but they're working. Something else very important is obviously the person has to be ready to be tested. And the guidelines give certain recommendations of certain ages that can vary depending on the earliest diagnosis in the family. But if somebody has, let's say, breast cancer at 30, the guidelines for BRCA1 and BRCA2 start screening at the age of 25. There is no reason to test somebody younger than 25. And I say that because I have the experience of seeing an 18-year-old running out of my office because she learned this. Between the ages of 18, well, at 18, you feel that you know everything and that you are an adult, but no. For ages 18 to 25, so many things happen in an individual life. They want to know what they want to do in the world. They're in college, and there is no need to burden with a result that you cannot do anything about it. Because if you could do something about it, that is clear, like you can obviously, everybody should eat healthy and not drink a lot of alcohol. So this is general things that you don't need to know if you carry a mutation to not to do. But there is no reason to test early, except for somebody who, for example, wants to have children earlier. And I say, well, what I want in many cases is more that the parents wants to know, because they want to know. But really, it should be to the child, to the side, and when is the right time. And even when it's 25, it may not be the right time, but then at least at 25, they need to see a genetic counselor, geneticist, and have a discussion. And it's a decision to make for them if they don't want, knowing that the screening recommendations that are expensive, if the insurance doesn't cover, it's not gonna happen if you don't have a test report in hand that shows that it's positive. Another reason so I said a reason to do it will be if somebody wants to have children before age 25. If you want to have children at age 25, know that there is a 50% chance of passing the mutation. And when we're talking about BRCA2 mutations and ATM mutations, if you carry a mutation and your partner carry a mutation, then we're talking about the possibility of 25% chance of having a child with another new condition. Okay, so the reason is if you want to have children early and you want to know what is your risk and you want to do something about it. But if somebody is not planning to have children, 25 is a perfect age and then obviously when the patient comes to see, we look at the ages of diagnosis in the family, and we will recommend. Something else that I heard and I want to point out is the guidelines are not that terrible. The guidelines allow you to fulfill your life, to have children, because the removal of the ovaries is at age 40.
Yeah.
For BRCA2 is up to age 45 because the ovarian cancer happen usually later. So this is what we're gonna see. We're gonna look at the family and we're gonna say, know that you can do at age 40. Or we can say, well, in your family it's a little bit earlier that you have to remove based on family history. Usually you remove 5 to 10 years earlier than the earliest diagnosis. Also, I also discuss when I see a 25-year-old who can carry a mutation, I said, you can remove your breast, but think about if you want to breastfeed. If you want to do that, do not remove the breast. Follow the mom. Well, it's MRI 25 to 29. I'm gonna show that later. And then do the breastfeeding and then remove. The screening for breast cancer is very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you should not feel that this is not allowing you to have a full life, to have the plans in your life, because it's possible. It's just that you need to do extra things that other people doesn't need to do. But it's important that you can have a good life, even with this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for those reminders. And I think it would be great to turn to Maddie, if you don't mind sharing. How old were you when you got tested? And I know you said it took you about a year to feel comfortable with getting tested, but how old were you and how did that impact your decision making?
21, 22. I think my main thing was, I didn't really want to know necessarily, just like you were talking about. It's just, I was like, I'm just going to go to college. And then after I get out of college, we'll deal with it. Kind of mentality was what I was going for. And I just like come home every summer and she'd be like, you want to? I'm like, no. You want to know? And then finally I was like, yeah, okay, I'm ready. And I had that idea of her having the results and me not, but then we're like, okay, obviously that's not going to work because I'm going to have to start doing things before the age of 35 or so yeah, once I kind of ended college, I was kind of ready. I'm like, all right, well, knowledge is power. Let's do it. Let's just see what happens. And a part of me, when I got tested, was like, I have the best luck ever. Like, I bet you I'm not going to get it. Like, I'm going to be the one in the family that doesn't have it. And then I got the call and I remember standing in my room. I was like, wow, like science is really powerful and knowing things is very important because there's a lot we can do rather if I didn't get tested and we didn't know. So it was emotional. However, I'm very grateful that my mom pushed me to do it. And I'm glad that I know now so I can take the steps necessary to, monitor.
Knowledge is power, and you can be really proactive with the information you have. So I'm glad you are in good hands. Can we turn to Beverly? I would love to echo the same questions Abigail was just asking of Trish and her daughter. How did you feel when you realized that you had the ATM mutation and that is what got passed on to Abigail, who is now living with metastatic breast cancer?
Oh, boy. Okay, so originally Abby had been diagnosed with early stage cancer. I believe that was like in March. And I remember very distinctly, she had just done her first chemotherapy treatment. And I was there at the house. I was going to be there for that weekend or that week, maybe the week or something. And she got a phone call from her doctor. And he said, we made a mistake and we ordered tumor markers. And we don't usually do it, you're early stage and you're doing chemo and it was a mistake, and we want you to get a bone scan. And I was standing there, and I can remember just how your heart just kind of drops, right? Mm-hmm. That he called the day or a couple days after her chemo treatment and wanted her to go in for a bone scan. That did not sound good for me. And so it wasn't for a little while that, we knew about the ATM mutation. But, emotionally, I feel like at that point, I had to put my emotions aside because she was going through so much. I had gotten off work. I worked in the school system as a physical therapist, and I'd gotten off for the summer. And I had gone up and I spent the entire summer with her. And she had 3 surgeries. She had chemotherapy. She had physical therapy coming into the house. She was in a wheelchair. I would take her to her doctor's appointments and having to maneuver that, and because she couldn't walk for a while because she'd had rods put in both of her femurs. And I remember talking to my boss from work, and I said, well, I'm not really sure about coming back or when. And I said, this is just my daughter's living a nightmare. And that's what I felt like. I felt like we were in a nightmare and I could not get out of it. And so then, we found that it was the ATM mutation. And so in some ways, I'm the kind of person I'm always asking why, what caused this? And so in some ways, it almost helped me to know that there was a reason, because I was like so blown away that here I had breast cancer, had gotten genetic testing and it was negative. Therefore, she wasn't getting early screenings. I mean, her doctors had said, no, you don't need to get mammograms yet, And so that was a really difficult thing. And I remember feeling very angry at one point that here I'd had genetic testing done, and here they'd started testing for the ATM mutation 5 years earlier. If somebody would have contacted me and said, you need to get tested, I would have done it. Maybe she would have not become metastatic. And that to me was the hardest part. What Dr. Mártir said about my middle son got tested. His wife has Lynch syndrome, and they had a young daughter, and they were in the process of trying to decide if they wanted to have any more children. Now, he tested negative, but if he would have been positive, they would have absolutely for sure not had any other children, because there's like certain cancers that are, linked to, ATM plus Lynch. And so that was a huge thing and a very helpful thing, that they then could make some decisions based on knowing. But yeah, it's been a very emotional roller coaster. And I have to say that for myself, and Abby knows this, my mom passed away a little over a month ago. And I feel like I felt like I'd been sticking my finger in the dam for 4 years, actually longer for other things, but probably since I had cancer. And all of a sudden that grief, that overwhelming grief just was like pouring out of me in days where I would just be crying. I feel like sometimes that's what we do. Grief has a time to come out. And for some people that might be right away. I related a lot to Trish when I first had breast cancer. I mean, I had a 10-year-old, I had a middle schooler, I had a high schooler, I had 2 kids in college, and then Abigail was in law school. My life, and I had a full-time job, and my husband was starting a private practice, and our life was full. I didn't even allow myself to grieve the loss of my breasts at that time. But, I think it happens, but it has to happen at the right time, when your body can actually let you go through what you need to grieve.
This made me mad because even when somebody doesn't carry a mutation or have their own testing, or they have not completed, they have not decided to be tested, every daughter who has a mother who had breast cancer is in an increased risk for breast cancer. We have the ways to do calculation, but the risk is usually, especially if we're doing the calculation in the daughter at early age, is more than 20%. And when somebody has a risk of more than 20%, is mammograms alternated with MRI. So even that, because that has nothing to do with the genes, that with doing genetic testing. It has to do with the physicians being aware of family history, asking the family history, and saying, they doing risk assessment. And sadly, usually the risk assessment is done by the radiologist when you go for the first time. When they ask you the question, they do calculation. But many good gynecologists will do the calculation. So Beverly, even when you, at the time that you had genetic testing, there was the test that was available. Based on family history, Abigail should have been started screening at the age of 30.
No, absolutely. And all of us girls have seen, different doctors in different states, different doctors who have said different things. And so, Dr. Mártir, you're absolutely right. I was told by not only the fertility doctors, but also my gynecologist that there was no need start screening early because of my mother tested negative for BRCA or for the BRCA mutations. And so, yes, there's a perfect example of different doctors not having the right information. And I think, Stephanie, you wanted to add something to that.
I did. Yeah. I mean, because so my mom was long gone when I went through my conversation, but I think that was also part of my emotional decision making, was that I was like, I don't know that because I knew it wasn't 100%. If you're positive, you're definitely going to get it. And I was like, I'm very comfortable and I'm very fortunate that, just based upon my cancer history alone, they're like, absolutely start the early screening. And I don't know that the MRI, because that was back in 2004. I don't know that they were recommending.
These have been for a long, long time.
Yeah. So I never got the MRI, but I definitely got a baseline mammogram and found out, of course, I had dense breasts, and then started having babies. And then I was like, I really should probably get back to having those mammograms. And what was fascinating was that at the time that
Angelina Jolie.
Yeah. I was like, oh, maybe I should go back and discuss that. And I can't remember if that would have made a difference. But at the time I had horrible health insurance. And I was like, well, I'm just going to deal with what it is, and I'll go when I have better health insurance. And in fact, when I found the lump, I had a dream that I had breast cancer, and I found the lump the next day. And we were still on crappy health insurance, but that was going to change 6 to 8 weeks out. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to sit on, I'm going to stop drinking coffee in case this is caffeine related. And it was definitely not caffeine related, but yeah. So anyways.
That's such a great reminder though, that your insurance coverage, your understanding of what your insurance will cover and where you are in life can often have a significant effect on whether or not you even ask the right questions, or even if you know where to get the right information. And so how important is it to know that there are resources out there, that there are places to go, that a genetic counselor is a good start to explore these things, but also to understand that I am a lawyer, and I lost the idea that doctors know everything a long time ago doing some medical malpractice work. But a lot of people still think that every doctor you go to knows everything. And it is so important. And I really want to make sure that everybody is hearing what Dr. Mártir is talking about, that there are a lot of doctors who are excellent. But when a doctor is operating or delving into things that are outside of their training, they may miss something because that's not their training. It's not that there's anything wrong with the doctor. It's not that they're bad. It's not that they've done anything wrong. It's just that they got a training in a particular box, and there are things that are outside their training. And so seeing a geneticist that understands all of the different things that act on the objective tests, right? All the family history, these calculations, those things are very important, because that's how you know what your risk is. That's how you know what guidelines apply to you, so that you are getting different types of testing that are better than just a mammogram, even though we know that mammograms are excellent at detecting breast cancer in some people. We know that there are other tests like MRIs that are able to detect other things. So knowledge, knowing who to talk to and where to put that advice within your rubric of how reliable is this information is so very, very important.
And thank you, Abigail. Thank you and your mother, Beverly, Dr. Mártir from the Miami Cancer Institute, Trish, Dr. Maddie, and Stephanie for being on today's panel. And thank you all for listening and tuning in week after week here on Breast Cancer Conversations. Please be mindful that all of our content and information is for educational purposes only and is never a substitute for medical advice. I welcome all of you to stay connected with us. Hop on over to survivingbreastcancer.org/events, where you will find our weekly programs of meetups, Movement Monday classes, workshops, and so much more. You can also continue the conversation with us on social media. Follow us on Instagram at survivingbreastcancer.org, all one word, as well as Twitter, SBC_org. Until next time, keep on thriving.